no matter how hard they studied. Some people find it really hard to understand the spoken Spanish. Let's see what we can do to make that easier. Hola, bienvenido! Soy Mariela and I'm really happy you're here. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any lessons. I've been uploading every Friday since I started, so I'm really excited to go through this journey together and learn more and more every week. I decided to make this video because I've been hearing so many stories of people that have been studying for years the language and yet they still can't manage to understand a native when they are speaking. You might wonder why. According to a study conducted by the University of Lyon in France, Spanish is one of the fastest languages spoken in the world. What does that mean? Check out this chart. So you may see that out of all the languages that they have looked at, Spanish, right next to Japanese, is the fastest language spoken. What does that mean? That means that they pronounce the most amount of syllables per second. Would you like me to illustrate with an example? No me sorprende que a la gente le cueste mucho entendernos cuando hablamos, porque realmente hablamos muy rápido y cuanto más rápido hablamos, más nos llenamos de energía y seguimos hablando palabra tras palabra tras palabra y la gente realmente le cuesta entender. Entonces, veamos en este video qué podemos hacer para que sea más divertido y más fácil entender cuando habla un nativo como yo. Alright, so for real now. Let's take a look at what we can do to make it better. Well, the first thing we can do, obviously, is to try to slow it down. That's easy if we are using a platform like YouTube or Audible or a podcast, so we can just use those tools that they are inbuilt in order to slow down the speech or the audio. So that would be easy. We can maybe listen to a 50% speed or 75% speed, and that will make things easier. At least to start with, and then you can build it up starting from there. Even go down all the way to 25% and pay attention to each word separately in particular, and then maybe go a little bit faster to 50% and see if you can put things together in an easier way. But what if we're talking to an actual person? Well, we can always ask them to slow down. They'll be happy to help us and they'll be happy to do it. Maybe some people will find it challenging because we speak the way we speak and we get used to that and it's hard to change that. But honestly, in my experience, whenever I was trying to learn a language and talking to a native and I was asking them to please slow down, they would happily do it and they really appreciate the fact that you're trying to speak their language. So I'm sure they'll help you. So how do you ask that? ¿Puedes hablar más lento, por favor? 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 The answer is going to be C, and the conversation is going to flow much easily for you. Another reason why you might be having trouble understanding a native speaker is because you might be taking your studies way too seriously. What do I mean with that? Books are great, and you know that I'm all down for formal or typical type of lessons, videos, workbooks, books, and I'm all down for that. And I really emphasize always to learn the proper grammar. But in the spoken language, there are a few things that the books will not teach you. Some of them will, but honestly, experience is the one that's going to teach you those things. And those things are the colloquialisms, hard for me to pronounce. And the definition is a word or phrase that's not formal or literary, typically used in ordinary, familiar conversation. What does that mean? It's way of speech, like it's a different type of speech, not a formal speech, but sentences or words that only sound right and only have the right connotation or sense or meaning in the spoken language. And that is learned from having conversations with a native, and they're very typical to the country, the region, the culture. So that might be why you're not understanding what they're saying, because they might be saying things that you haven't learned. People usually use jokes when they speak, or the intonation also changes a lot, and that makes for the meaning of the speech, of the dialogue. So pay attention to intonation. A great way actually of learning that is, if you don't have access to conversations with a native, watch TV, and simple shows like sitcoms and stuff like that will teach you that kind of daily informal language that you need to understand. It's very common for people when they're having an informal dialogue to use sayings, and that again is very particular of the region, of the culture. So a good way of learning those is just a Google search. You can Google Mexican sayings or Argentinian sayings, and I'm sure that you'll find a nice list of them alongside with the translation. And if not, we can make a video about that in the future. Let me know if you're interested in that. Maybe comment it down below. Of course, these aspects of the language are quite advanced, so it's not for everybody. So if you're just starting, keep doing what you're doing, keep learning the grammar and the basic vocabulary, and then in the future we'll move on towards colloquialisms and sayings and intonations. But if you already know your grammar and have a good base of vocabulary and you're still having trouble understanding a native, this may be your why, and maybe it's time to step it up a little bit and learn these more advanced aspects of the language. How do you do that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, a great way of doing that is by practicing in real life. And by real life, of course, I mean TV. So actually, TV shows, and especially telenovelas, which are soap operas mostly made in Mexico or Colombia, are a great way of learning this type of expressions when it comes to learning Spanish, because they're super dramatic. Everything is going on all the time, and there's so many different scenarios. So by watching just one episode, you might learn a good amount of language worth for different types of conversations in different scenarios. So check them out, they're really fun. I don't have any in particular to recommend you, but just Google telenovelas and you'll find you're in for a treat, trust me. And let me know how things go. Another way of learning these kind of things is to fully immerse yourself in the language, and maybe start listening to a radio station where they speak Spanish, or music in Spanish. There's some great artists all around Latin America and Spain, and I'm sure that you'll find something to your taste, and maybe follow along the lyrics, print them out and try to sing along and learn new words and expressions, and just embrace the poetic aspect of the language. Spanish is so poetic and it's so full of flavor, if you know what I mean. It's beyond words. There's so much that the words carry, their connotation, their intonation, even the sentence structure, and music is a great way of learning that. Even TV commercials. Search for a few Spanish TV commercials and just have a blast with it. Like, you'll probably know the product they're talking about, so that will make things easier. They usually use very simple language because they're targeting everybody and they want everybody to understand what they're saying, but at the same time they use very colloquial language because they want to stay relatable. So I think commercials honestly are a great way of learning the spoken language in an informal way. Another reason why you might be having trouble understanding a native is because honestly, Spanish is spoken in over 20 countries in the whole world. So as you might think, there are many different ways of speaking the language. There's so many dialects that vary from region to region, from country to country. Even within a country, they usually have different dialects according to the region of the country. For example, I'm from Argentina, and particularly from Buenos Aires, which is the capital city in the center of the country. Argentina is a very long country, and in the north, they speak very differently. So again, focus on what you want. If you're studying Spanish for the sake of studying it, just focus on a Spanish that is mostly neutral. So a Mexican Spanish or a Colombian Spanish could be great, but if you're studying Spanish because you want to travel or spend some time in a particular country, just focus on that type of Spanish and start using lessons that come from that country in particular. That will help your ear get used to the accent, to the intonation, even to the words. Vocabulary tends to vary from country to country, and I am going to make a video on that in the future, and different types of words for the same object. But keep that in mind. If your goal is to go to a certain country, just try to focus on the vocabulary in that particular country. Don't get me wrong, they are still going to understand what you're saying if you refer to a certain object using a different word that they would use it in a different country. But might as well, right? Like, might as well learn the word they use in the country you're going to visit. I think that would make sense. And also, and this is maybe a heads up, I lived in Mexico for a while, for a few months, and I noticed that some objects have the name of words that in Argentina are bad words. So it's funny because it was my own language, and when they were mentioning these objects, I was like, what are you saying? What's going on? But it's just the name of the object, and in Argentina that would be very rude. So I still honestly have trouble referring to those objects in Mexico with the Mexican word. I kind of use the Argentina word because it just doesn't sound right. Like, I can't, what if my mom hears it? You know what I mean? Another thing that you might want to look at is that if you already know a good amount of grammar and a good amount of vocabulary and you still have trouble understanding what a person is saying, maybe that person could be using words that are out of your league. What do I mean by that? Are they super educated? Are they coming from a particular field? Are they using vocabulary that is niched, like they belong to the scientific field or the tech field? So maybe you want to look that up. And if that's the case, a little research, a quick list of words will make things way easier. So let's say you're studying Spanish in order to go and do your master's in Spain or whatever. Just grab a book in that language, in Spanish, obviously, from that field, and start getting familiar with those words. So that will make things way easier. When I was in Argentina, I went to medical school, and I was reading physiology books that were in English because first they were the latest version and they weren't translated into Spanish yet, so they were only available in English, but also because the papers, the scientific papers, are generally written in English. So I already want to, even though I was only in third year of the career, I wanted to have that heads up and get familiar with the language. So when the time came of reading papers or maybe even writing a paper, I would already have that vocabulary inbuilt in me. So I think that's a good tip. And finally, Spanish is hard to understand, not only because it's really fast and they might be using words you don't know or expressions you don't know, but also we use sounds that are not present in the English language. An example of that is the rolling R. If a person says ferrocarril, it's really hard for your brain to comprehend how that word is spelled or even what that word sounds like, because the rolling R is not present in the English language. And I'm sure that there are more examples of like this, but be easy on yourself and take your time, because you are learning a different language that comes from a different region. Even through history we can see that Spanish came from Latin, that has a certain type of words, a certain type of syntaxes and tenses, whereas English came from the Germanic Nordic languages, and they are completely different. They came from different groups of people that were not communicated, so they have almost nothing in common. So be easy on yourself, take it slow, and keep learning Spanish because it's wonderful and you're doing great. Alright guys, I hope my tips made it easier on you to understand the spoken language, and I'll be here soon again with more videos and more lessons. Let me know what kind of videos you enjoy the most, if you prefer rather broad videos on tips how to learn, or you enjoy specific grammar oriented videos, and I'll be happy to do either. So let me know down below, and again, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next Friday. Ciao ciao!